Ted Lawson shoved the throttles forward and felt the B-25 shudder against 467 feet of wet wooden flight deck, half what the airplane needed on a good day, and this day had nothing good about it. Rain slashed horizontal across the windscreen. The carrier Hornet pitched through 30-foot swells, bow rising, falling. The deck crew flattened against the island to keep from getting blown overboard. Lawson's Mitchell carried 2,000 pounds of bombs, 1,041 gallons of fuel, and 5 men who understood a math problem that had no clean answer. They had launched 650 miles from Tokyo. The mission plan called for 400. Nobody in that cockpit needed a slide rule to know what those extra 250 miles meant. If your father or grandfather flew in the war, or worked the deck of a carrier, or built the planes that came off it, drop his name in the comments, his unit if you know it, his theater. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next in this story. Hit like so it reaches the families who've never heard it told straight, and if you know a Doolittle Raider's name, say it out loud down there. So why were 16 Army medium bombers sitting on the deck of a Navy carrier 650 miles from the Japanese coast on the morning of April 18, 1942? The short answer is humiliation. 4 months and 11 days earlier, 353 Japanese aircraft had torn Pearl Harbor apart in under 2 hours, sinking or crippling 8 battleships, killing 2,403 Americans, and gutting the Pacific Fleet's confidence in a single Sunday morning. The strategic damage mattered. The psychological damage mattered more. Japan had struck the continental perimeter of the United States and gotten away clean. No retaliation followed. Weeks passed. Bataan fell, then Wake Island, then Singapore. The Japanese Empire expanded at a pace that made the German blitzkrieg look methodical, and Washington had nothing. No offensive capability, no striking range, no way to touch the home islands. Roosevelt wanted a response, something visible, something that hit Tokyo itself. The problem sat in basic geography. No American fighter or bomber could reach Japan from any friendly base and return. Carriers could launch strikes, but their aircraft lacked the range to hit Tokyo from outside the patrol radius of Japanese picket boats, get spotted early, and the carriers themselves became targets. The Navy would not risk its last operational flat tops for a symbolic raid. Francis Lowe changed the equation in January 1942 with a question so simple it sounded stupid. Lowe, a submariner on Admiral King's staff, had watched Army bombers practice runs against a carrier-shaped outline painted on a runway in Norfolk. He asked, could an Army bomber take off from an actual carrier deck? Not land on one, just take off, fly the mission, land somewhere else. King sent the idea to Jimmy Doolittle, and Doolittle, an aeronautical engineer with a doctorate from MIT, who also happened to be one of the finest pilots alive, ran the numbers in 3 days. The B-25. Mitchell could do it. Barely. Strip the ventral turret, pull the liaison radio, add auxiliary fuel tanks in the bomb bay and crawl space, reduce the bomb load, and the airplane could lift off a carrier deck in under 500 feet and fly roughly 2,200 miles. The plan called for a late afternoon launch at 400 miles out, bomb Tokyo at dusk, then fly onto airfields in unoccupied China and land in darkness. Tight margins, survivable margins. The morning of April 18th killed those margins. At 6:15 a.m., the task force, Hornet and Enterprise with their escorts, ran into the Nito Maru, a Japanese picket boat 70 miles ahead of the planned launch point. The cruiser Nashville opened fire and sank her, but not before the Nito Maru transmitted a contact report. Vice Admiral Halsey faced a decision that took him roughly 4 minutes. He flashed a signal to the Hornet. Launch planes, to Colonel Doolittle and his gallant command, good luck and God bless you. Doolittle's after-action report notes the launch conditions flatly. Wind approximately 27 knots, sea rough, and the declassified mission file records what that meant in practice. Every bomber carried fuel for roughly 1,200 miles. The flight to Tokyo and onward to the Chinese airfields now measured closer to 1,500. The arithmetic produced a 200-mile deficit, and the deficit pointed at one outcome. Every crew that rolled down that pitching deck understood they lacked the fuel to reach any friendly landing strip. They launched anyway. Doolittle went first. The B-25 Mitchell had no business on an aircraft carrier. North American Aviation designed it to operate from concrete runways of 3,000 feet or more, with ground crews, fuel trucks, and armament sheds nearby. The airplane spanned 67 feet and 4 inches, wingtip to wingtip. Loaded for the Doolittle mission, each Mitchell weighed roughly 31,000 pounds, not 28,000, as the original planning documents estimated. Because the auxiliary fuel tanks added weight nobody had fully accounted for until the plane sat on the Hornet's deck. The Navy's own carrier bombers, the SBD Dauntless and TBD Devastator, weighed under 10,000 pounds and needed catapult assistance or a headwind to get airborne. The Mitchell had no tailhook, no folding wings, no catapult attachment points. It landed on tricycle gear at 90 miles per hour onto surfaces measured in thousands of feet. The Hornet's flight deck offered 467 feet from the stern to the bow, and the first airplane, Doolittle's, got all of it. The 16th airplane got roughly 250. Lieutenant Henry Miller figured out how to make it work. Miller, a Navy pilot assigned to train the Army crews at Eglin Field in Florida during March 1942, taught bomber pilots a technique none of them had ever practiced and most considered aerodynamically suspect. Hold the brakes, run the engines to full power, release brakes and pull back immediately, hauling the nose up at a speed well below the published stall threshold of the B-25. The headwind across the carrier deck, generated by the ship steaming at full speed into a natural wind, would supply the missing airspeed, in theory. Miller had the crews practicing short-field takeoffs from painted lines on a Florida runway, and the distances shrank week by week, 300 feet, 275. He got one Mitchell airborne in 287 feet with a simulated combat load. "The airplane will fly," Miller told Doolittle. "The pilots need to trust it." Trust sat at the center of a deeper problem. The crews knew how to fly the B-25 in combat. They did not know how to fly it off a ship that pitched 15 degrees in heavy seas, while salt spray coated the windscreens, and the deck officer timed the bow's upward roll to give each pilot an extra few degrees of climb angle at the moment of release. The smell of avgas hung over everything. Fuel had seeped from overfilled auxiliary tanks during the crossing, and deck crews mopped it with rags, knowing one spark from a rough exhaust could turn the Hornet into a floating crematorium. Doolittle's mission report describes the takeoff procedure in language stripped of drama. Launched with flaps full down, stabilizers set in the full nose-up position, and engines at maximum rated power. What that sentence leaves out is the 60-foot drop between the bow of the carrier and the surface of the North Pacific. Every pilot who cleared that deck saw gray ocean fill the windscreen before the Mitchell clawed enough airspeed to climb. So, what made Roosevelt accept these odds? The strategic calculus looks insane on paper. 16 bombers carrying 4 bombs each, 64 weapons total, aimed at an industrial complex spanning the 4 largest cities in Japan. 64 bombs could not dent Japanese war production. The Joint Chiefs knew it. Doolittle knew it. The target list included oil refineries, steel mills, and munitions factories, but the real target lived inside Japanese heads. General Marshall's memorandum to Roosevelt, dated February 19, 1942, frames the raid's purpose in a single clause: to create doubt in the minds of the Japanese as to the safety of their homeland. Marshall understood something that the tonnage-obsessed bombing theorists at the Air Corps Tactical School had missed for a decade. Damage to morale compounds. Damage to steel does not. The Japanese military had staked its credibility on an impenetrable defensive perimeter. The Emperor's safety underwrote the entire imperial project. A single bomb falling within earshot of the imperial palace, even if it hit nothing of value, would crack that promise in a way no amount of explaining could repair. Roosevelt grasped this. Churchill grasped it. The 64 bombs didn't need to destroy anything. They needed to land. Doolittle reached the Japanese coast at 12:30 p.m. local time, flying at treetop level to avoid radar detection, and pulled up to 1,500 feet for his bomb run over northern Tokyo. Doolittle pulled the release handle over Tokyo and felt the Mitchell jump as 4 incendiary clusters dropped free into the smoke rising from the industrial district below. His bombardier, Fred Bramer, called bombs away at 12:30 p.m., and Doolittle shoved the nose down, diving back to rooftop height, threading between factory stacks and radio towers at 270 miles per hour, while anti-aircraft fire chewed the air behind him. He crossed the far edge of the city in under 4 minutes. Behind him, at staggered intervals stretching across nearly 3 hours, 15 more Mitchells bore in on Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Kobe, and the oil facilities near Yokosuka. The Japanese had 9 hours of warning and did almost nothing with it. The Nitomaru's contact report reached Combined Fleet Headquarters before 7 a.m. Admiral Ugaki noted in his diary that the staff assumed the approaching force carried only carrier aircraft, fighters and dive bombers with a combat radius under 200 miles. The defensive plan activated accordingly. Naval interceptors scrambled to meet an expected attack from the east at close range. But the attack came from the north, at treetop level, by aircraft the Japanese Navy had not considered, medium bombers, land-based. Nobody on Ugaki's staff had gamed this scenario, because nobody believed a land-based bomber could launch from a carrier deck. The assumption killed the intercept. Japanese fighters orbited over water looking east, while Doolittle's crews crossed the coastline from the north and scattered across 4 cities. A few Nakajima Ki-45s gave chase over Tokyo. They failed to bring down a single Mitchell. Look at what 80 men accomplished in the next 90 minutes. Crew number 3, piloted by Lieutenant Robert Gray, put incendiaries into the Japan Special Steel Company works and a gas company facility in central Tokyo. Crew number 6, under Lieutenant Dean Hallmark, hit the steel works near the waterfront. Crew number 10, flown by Lieutenant Richard Joyce, struck the Japan Diesel Manufacturing Company. The bombs fell light, 4 per airplane, 1,000 pounds of ordnance total per crew. And the physical damage amounted to roughly 50 structures destroyed, minor disruption to utilities, and 13 Japanese civilians killed. Militarily negligible, psychologically devastating. A Japanese government report declassified after the war. I tracked down the translated summary in the Air Force Historical Research Agency files at Maxwell. Uses language that tells you everything about the raid's real effect. The report calls the bombing an unexpected and regrettable event that has caused widespread anxiety among the civilian population regarding the defensive capabilities of the homeland. Widespread anxiety. Not damage, not casualties, anxiety. Marshall's memorandum from 2 months earlier could have written that sentence. The crack in the imperial promise opened exactly where he predicted. But the price came due over China that night, and it came due hard. All 16 Mitchells ran dry before reaching their designated airfields. The headwinds over the East China Sea ate the last reserves. Crews who had maintained strict fuel discipline, leaning the mixture until the engines coughed, flying at minimum power settings, bleeding altitude to trade height for distance, still fell short by margins ranging from 50 to 300 miles. Darkness swallowed the Chinese coast. Rain closed in. Ceilings dropped below 200 feet over mountainous terrain that peaked above 6,000. 11 crews bailed out into blackness over Zhejiang and Jiangxi provinces, their parachutes opening into rain so thick that several men reported hearing the canopy rustle, but seeing nothing. Not the silk above them, not the ground rushing up below. 4 crews crash-landed along the coast or ditched in the surf. 1 crew, and only one, landed intact, setting down at a Soviet airfield near Vladivostok, where the Soviets promptly interned them for 13 months. Ted Lawson's Mitchell hit the water off the Chinese coast at roughly 135 miles per hour. The impact shattered both his legs. His bombardier, Robert Clever, pulled him from the wreckage in chest-deep surf. Lawson lost his left leg to a Chinese army surgeon, operating by kerosene lamp in a village schoolhouse 4 days later. He kept flying. Doolittle sat alone in the rain on a Chinese hillside that night, surrounded by pieces of his parachute, convinced the mission had failed and that he'd face a court-martial when he got home. They gave him the Medal of Honor instead. 64 bombs, 50 structures, 13 dead. By any conventional measure of strategic bombing, the Doolittle Raid scored somewhere between irrelevant and embarrassing. Curtis LeMay's B-29s would eventually drop incendiaries that killed 100,000 people in a single night over Tokyo. 64 bombs wouldn't have armed a single one of those later raids, but Yamamoto Isoroku, the man who planned Pearl Harbor, who understood American industrial psychology better than anyone in the Imperial Navy, treated those 64 bombs like an existential crisis, and that reaction broke Japan's strategic timeline in half. Within 6 weeks of the raid, Yamamoto forced through Operation MY, the attack on Midway Atoll, over the objections of his own staff. His argument was simple. The defensive perimeter had failed, the Emperor's safety could not be guaranteed, and the American carrier force had to be destroyed before it launched another strike against the homeland. The Naval General Staff had favored operations in the South Pacific and Indian Ocean. Yamamoto overruled them. The Tokyo raid made the Midway operation inevitable. Admiral Nimitz's intelligence officer Edwin Layton wrote after the war. Layton had spent those weeks reading intercepted Japanese communications and watching Yamamoto's planning accelerate from cautious to reckless. The Doolittle Raid didn't sink a single ship. It sank Yamamoto's judgment. Midway cost Japan 4 fleet carriers and the offensive initiative in the Pacific. Permanently. The Chinese paid for sheltering the raiders in a currency nobody in Washington fully anticipated. Japanese forces launched the Zhejiang-Jiangxi campaign in May 1942, sweeping through the provinces where Doolittle's crews had come down, systematically destroying airfields and punishing any village suspected of aiding American airmen. The death toll among Chinese civilians reached an estimated 250,000. Entire towns burned. Chiang Kai-shek's government protested to Washington. The declassified correspondence shows Marshall acknowledged the consequences in a 3-sentence memo that says nothing adequate. The records don't say whether Doolittle ever read it. 8 raiders fell into Japanese hands. 3 of them, Dean Hallmark, William Farrow, and Harold Spatz, faced a military tribunal in Shanghai that spent approximately 20 minutes on deliberation. The Japanese executed them by firing squad on October 15, 1942. A 4th, Robert Meader, died of starvation and disease in a Japanese prison camp in December 1943. The remaining 4 survived 40 months of captivity, beatings and solitary confinement in cells too small to stand upright. Jacob de Shazer, one of those 4, returned to Japan after the war as a Christian missionary and lived there for 30 years. It has nothing to do with the military story. I can't leave it out. So what became of the rest? Doolittle jumped from colonel to brigadier general overnight, commanded the 12th Air Force in North Africa, then the 15th in the Mediterranean, then the 8th in England, the largest strategic bombing force ever assembled. He retired as a lieutenant general, went back to Shell Oil, and lived to 96. He died in 1993. The last year the surviving raiders still held their annual reunion with a full toast from the silver goblets, 80 of them, each engraved with a raider's name, turned upside down as each man died. Ted Lawson wrote 30 Seconds Over Tokyo from a hospital bed in 1943. MGM made it into a movie starring Van Johnson. Lawson flew combat again with a prosthetic leg, which the Army probably should not have allowed and definitely did not publicize. Henry Miller, the Navy pilot who taught Army men to do something the aeronautics manual said couldn't work, received no decoration for his role in the raid. He appears in Doolittle's after-action report exactly once, identified only by rank and last name. The Navy transferred him to other duties. His contribution surfaces in footnotes. The Hornet carried those 16 Mitchells across 4,000 miles of open Pacific, launched them into weather that would have grounded a peacetime training flight, and turned for home without losing a man on deck. 5 months later, Japanese torpedoes sank her at the Battle of Santa Cruz. Every aircraft she launched that April morning performed exactly as designed. Each one flew until the fuel ran out and then fell out of the sky over a country that wasn't expecting them. Doolittle's after-action report, filed with Army Air Forces headquarters, classified the mission's material results as negligible. He listed the strategic results in a separate paragraph. That paragraph remains classified.